Have you ever wondered why a temporary trade truce between two global powers, one that was celebrated, really loudly as this outstanding success, might actually tell us more about an aggressive, ongoing strategic competition that's happening way beyond the negotiating table?
It's a fascinating moment, isn't it? Where
Yeah.
you have this incredibly positive language, this presidential handshake, but underneath it all, there's this really focused, long-term push to completely reshape global supply chains.
Right. And that's what we want to get into today. We're looking right at the aftermath of that big meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping. The headlines were glowing.
Oh, absolutely. President Trump called it amazing, outstanding, even rated the meeting a 12 out of 10. I mean, that sounds like game over, doesn't it?
It really does. It paints this picture of like total resolution, trade war, done, finish.
But when you look closer, the reality seems much more complex and, frankly, much more temporary.
So our mission here is to try and unpack that. Separate the rhetoric from the reality. What did each side actually agree to? What concessions were made? And what does that tell us about the real fight here? The one over high-tech dominance and critical resources, especially rare earth minerals.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's unpack it. If we kind of push aside the 12 out of 10 score for a second, what were the specific things announced right after the meeting that made it look like such a diplomatic win?
Well, there were some immediate sort of reciprocal moves. The U.S. agreed to reduce some existing tariffs on Chinese goods by 10%. That was tangible.
Okay.
But maybe more significant signaling-wise was putting future sales of advanced computer chips to Beijing on the agenda. Now, that didn't mean approval, but it suggested, a potential loosening of tech restrictions, something China really, really wanted.
And what about China? What did they put on the table? It seemed focused on, well, buying American stuff.
Very much so. They pledged to buy massive amounts. That was the phrase of U.S. farm products. Soybeans were specifically mentioned, a big sticking point, obviously, but also sorghum, other farm goods.
Right, the agricultural sector had been hit hard.
Exactly. And they also agreed to buy American energy, specifically pointing to supplies from Alaska. Plus, there was a separate sort of humanitarian piece. China agreed to crack down on fentanyl production to help the U.S. with its crisis.
So it sounds like both sides got something they could immediately point to back home. A quick win.
Pretty much. A bit of tariff relief for U.S. consumers, potential chip access down the road, and big promises for U.S. farmers and energy producers.
But you mentioned the temporary nature. That's what's really striking here. It doesn't sound like a peace treaty ending the war, more like calling a timeout.
That's exactly the feeling you get. I mean, the core theme was suspension. Chinese officials confirmed a consensus, and that specifically included suspending their own potential restrictions on rare earth mineral exports.
Ah, the rare earths. We'll come back to that.
Definitely. But the overall agreement, essentially, was that most of the really harsh economic measures, the ones designed to inflict pain, like potential U.S. action against Chinese shipping, would just go away for about a year.
A year. Just 12 months. It makes you wonder, right? If things were so outstanding, a 12 out of 10, why not lock it down? Why build in an expiration date?
That's the key question. It strongly suggests this was a truce, not a final chapter. The leaders clearly weren't ready, or maybe able, to hammer out a permanent complex deal right then.
So they agreed to meet again the next year.
Yep, scheduled for April in China. It tells you the big underlying issues, technology, strategic competition. They were still very much live. They just agreed to, stop the immediate economic bleeding for a bit while the deeper game continued.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me, the rare earths. Why was China potentially restricting them, and why was getting that suspension such a huge deal for the U.S.?
Because China's leverage over rare earths is just immense. If they had actually gone through with the export restrictions they were hinting at, it would have been like turning off a tap for critical global industries.
Maybe just quickly explain for anyone listening who hears rare earths and thinks, rare rocks. Why are they so vital? Why the panic?
Yeah, it's easy to underestimate. They aren't necessarily geologically rare, but processing them is complex and concentrated. And their properties, unique, essential. We're talking about powerful magnets, crucial conductive abilities.
Used in?
Oh, everything, state of the art.
Yeah.
Electric vehicle motors rely on them. Wind turbines, sophisticated missile guidance systems, fighter jets, medical imaging machines, basically any high-performance advanced machinery.
So without a steady supply.
Without that steady supply, the whole U.S. ambition of revitalizing advanced manufacturing, especially in areas like defense tech and green energy, it just hits a massive wall. Getting China to back off those restrictions, even temporarily, was a really significant tactical win for the U.S.
Okay, so the U.S. got that crucial policy pause. It kept the supply chain for these vital materials open for another year. What was China really after in these talks? What did they prioritize?
Technology. Plain and simple. Access to sophisticated technology that they can't yet produce reliably or at scale themselves. Think high-end memory, advanced processing chips, the kind of stuff NVIDIA makes, for example.
They want to climb that value chain.
Exactly. They need that technology transfer, or at least access, to fuel their own high-tech ambitions. That was their #1 goal, beyond the tariff relief.
But the analysis suggests they didn't really get that, did they? Not the high-end tech access.
That seems to be the consensus. There was talk of putting chips on the agenda, but no firm commitment to sell the most advanced stuff.
So if the U.S. got the rare earths assurance and China didn't get the cutting-edge chips, what did President Xi actually walk away with, besides promises of soybean purchases?
Well, that's the fascinating imbalance, isn't it? China got the promises for farm and energy buys valuable, sure, but likely not massive in the grand scheme of U.S.-China trade.
Yeah.
They didn't get the key tech access they sought.
So,
But what they did get, and this shouldn't be underestimated, was a huge domestic political win. Think about it. Extended positive press coverage featuring the American president showering President Xi with praise, calling the meeting outstanding.
so the optics, the public validation on the world stage.
Precisely. For President Xi, projecting strength, stability, and successful global leadership back home is incredibly important. Have the U.S. president publicly laud the meeting as a 12 out of 10 success, that's powerful domestically.
Wait a minute, though. If President Xi got that kind of public endorsement, that high-level praise, isn't that potentially worth more in the long run than just a temporary pause on tariffs or some farm deals? That sounds like a strategic win politically.
That's a really sharp point, and it gets to the nuance. You're right. While the U.S. might have won the immediate policy battle securing the rare earth flow, China arguably won the geopolitical PR battle.
Securing legitimacy and status.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shows the negotiation wasn't just about dollars and cents or even just technology access. It was also about positioning, about image, about projecting leadership for the future. A tactical win for the U.S. on resources, a strategic PR win for China.
Okay, let's zoom out then. If we connect this truce, this temporary pause, to the bigger picture, how does this meeting fit into the larger U.S. strategy towards China? Surely it wasn't just about resolving immediate trade friction.
That's the critical strategic question, isn't it? Was this meeting just about fixing a trade spat, or was it one move and a much larger ongoing effort to, well, contain China's influence? The evidence really points towards the latter.
A continuous containment strategy.
Yes, and it's a strategy that's been developing across administrations. It seems to operate on two main tracks. First, you have the pivot to Asia idea, strengthening alliances, deepening investment ties with other countries in the region.
Okay, building up partnerships.
Right. But second, and maybe more aggressively, there's an active effort to try and ring-fence China, to prevent Beijing from forging deeper economic and technological links with those same regional partners.
And you're saying this containment effort was actually scoring wins while all the attention was on the big presidential meeting? Kind of under the radar.
Absolutely. Just before the Trump-Chat summit, the U.S. Secretary of State was traveling through Southeast Asia. Malaysia, Cambodia were key stops. And that trip secured some really significant strategic agreements that got lost in the noise.
Like what? Give us some specifics of these overlooked wins.
Okay, two big areas. First, digital services taxes, or DSTs. This is a huge issue for U.S. tech giants.
Right. Countries wanting to tax Google's ad revenue or Amazon's sales within their borders.
Exactly. The U.S. sees these DSTs as protectionist, targeting American companies. Well, during that trip, the U.S. got agreements from countries like Malaysia and Cambodia not to impose these taxes on U.S. tech firms. That's a direct win, protecting billions in revenue for Silicon Valley.
Okay, so a financial shield for big tech. What was the other area? You mentioned critical minerals earlier.
That ties into export controls. The U.S. secured commitments from these same countries to align their export control policies with U.S. security interests.
Meaning,
in practice, they agreed they wouldn't ship critical minerals or sensitive technology components, like advanced chips, to China if the U.S. restricts those items. They're essentially lining up with the U.S. side in this emerging tech supply chain divide.
Wow. So that's actively building the ring fence you mentioned, limiting China's access to necessary components from other regional players.
It's a very direct form of strategic tightening. It makes it harder for China to source what it needs for its own high-tech development outside of direct U.S. control or influence.
And how does this connect back to finding alternatives for rare earths, besides just getting China to pause restrictions? Is the U.S. actively trying to build non-Chinese supply chains?
Oh, aggressively so.
Yeah.
They're definitely learning from allies like Japan, who got burned by Chinese rare earth restrictions years ago and worked hard to diversify. The U.S. and Japan even made a specific, albeit light touch, agreement to use policy tools together to cut their reliance on China for these minerals.
So Japan's already done some of this work.
Yes, Japan's manufacturing base, especially for things needing powerful magnets, forced them to find alternative sources and processing methods. They've had some real success. Now the U.S. is playing catch-up, but doing it aggressively.
Are there concrete examples of the U.S. government putting money behind this diversification?
Yes, and this shows the level of commitment. Look at the U.S. Export-Import Bank, the government's official export credit agency. It provides loans, insurance to boost U.S. exports.
Yep.
Well, the XM Bank announced specific new investment initiatives targeting rare earth mining operations in places like Australia. This isn't just talk. It's direct federal financial backing to develop mining and processing capacity in a friendly country. It's a clear, tangible part of the strategy to build secure supply chains outside of China.
So that strategy containing China through regulatory alignment in Asia and actively funding alternative supply chains, that was all happening full steam ahead, even while the leaders were shaking hands and calling the truce outstanding.
It really does look like a strategic masterclass in parallel action. The high-profile meeting delivered a necessary tactical pause, got the U.S. temporary relief on rare earths. But simultaneously, the quieter, persistent containment strategy was racking up significant, long-term strategic gains, reshaping the technological landscape in Asia.
So the key takeaway for you listening might be this. Those high ratings, that glowing press, it really masked a much more complex strategic reality. Yes, the U.S. got a temporary win by removing that rare earth roadblock, but the underlying tech and trade war still raging. And at the same time, this U.S. containment strategy across Asia was quietly delivering real benefits, pushing forward the diversification of critical supply chains away from Beijing.
And you know what really stands out, thinking about the whole sequence, is the final act, the stage management, if you will. After the big meeting, President Trump left the wider APEC summit early. He went home.
Okay.
But President Xi Jinping, he stayed, remained for the duration, taking center stage, meeting and talking with all of America's traditional allies and other key Asian leaders for 3 full days. Uninterrupted stage time, basically.
Huh. That deliberate contrast, one leader leaving, the other staying to dominate the room, that does raise a final question, doesn't it? About whose influence really came out on top in the longer diplomatic game in the region.
Exactly. It suggests that while the U.S. might have won that immediate tactical skirmish over rare earths in the bilateral meeting, the broader strategic competition for hearts, minds, and influence across Asia, that's still very much in play. And those 3 extra days of FaceTime for President Xi might just matter quite a bit down the road.